Okay, welcome to the Disney Therapist. This is going to be a little bit quicker, like introduction than we normally do. This is part 2. We actually filmed all of this in one sitting, and we realized it was really, really long, so we wanted to split it up into 2 parts. So we're recording this at the end, and I'm putting it at the beginning. So this is part 2 of 20 healthy relationships. So if it feels like you're missing something, make sure you go back and listen to last week's episode, part 1. And with that, let's get into it.
Yep.
It almost makes me, I think that's almost a good space to transition to another one I had on my list, which was Moana.
Yes.
Right? That's a very healthy space of a family dynamic. Even though Dad, at the beginning of Moana, like the chief, is about to go burn all the boats down, right? So there's some heavy conflict in the family unit, but they're still showing up. Like the dad at no point is making Moana responsible for his emotional state. He's just trying to guide her, and she's trying to live her own life. So, right? So conflict happens.
Yeah.
But then Grandma comes in and passes, but then really teaches Moana that she's trying to take care of the whole family, right? Yeah. So there's this healthy space between each of the family members, but they're all also relying on each other and being dependent on each other. Yeah. Because Moana wants to take care of the tribe, right? The how far I'll go is really about like, I want to take care of the tribe, but I'm also feeling like called to do something else. So how do you balance that stuff? Which is, I think, something every one of us have done at some point, right? We have to leave the nest. We have to figure out who we are. We have to figure out how to be an adult. If you're listening to this and you're a teenager, like you have to figure this stuff out sometimes. Like it's hard to kind of figure out who we are outside of the immediate family unit, but still be a part of the family unit.
Yeah. And so the terminology, right, that's used there, really kind of the buzzword is we need to individuate, right? And so
is that the therapy word? Therapy word alert.
I think it's the clinical word.
Oh, okay.
I think that it's not words we should use with clients. But there's this process where we are trying to become our own person, and that's going to step on toes. And that's what you're talking about, is that she is going to step on toes, right? She steps on her father's toes and kind of the ideology of the current culture.
Yeah.
And that's scary. And one of the beautiful things that you're talking about is even though that she's individuating, she's stepping on toes, she is still welcome, she's still embraced, and she's still loved. And that's where it's healthy to be able to say, this is my views. And just because you don't like my views does not mean that you don't like me.
Yeah.
And that's difficult.
It's very difficult. Mm-hmm. I think too, it like at the end of the movie when she shows up, right? Like her parents aren't scolding her, like you shouldn't have left. Yeah. Like they're just happy she's home and they're accepting. Yeah. And then what do? They actually let her influence them because she's learned something, she's grown, and then they all go off.
Yeah. When there's a healthy space, right? When there's this opportunity to say, what were you doing? What brought you to that space? And I think that in the process of individuating, right, it's something that I think is going to be helpful for people who are listening or people who just want to help understand, right, is sometimes we have to break away, which is why I think that going off to college was always so important, because you leave home and you allow people to feel the emptiness of your presence. Yeah. Not in a toxic way, not in a petty way, but being able to say that, you miss me. And maybe my terminology is going to suck here. There's a cost for my relationship. That's me setting healthy boundaries, saying that, hey, like I want to participate, but I couldn't participate here because you didn't allow me to have some of my own thought. And I think that's why, like, when we go off to college and when we come home, why those home visits are so beautiful. Because
can be. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Right. The potential, right? As long as people recognize the boundaries. One, as long as we know to set boundaries as we learn about ourselves. And if family recognizes that not maybe making space for us can push us away, and those visits get further and further away. It's almost a dance.
Absolutely. I think too, one of the things it just hit me is, as we're talking about this stuff, a lot of this stuff, and this is, I think, maybe one of the biggest critiques from like Disney movies is it's that perfect world, right? Like we're definitely going to that optimistic, idealized version of like, this is what it could be.
Yes.
And the reason I wanted to say that right now is because I think it's important to say, like, just because we're talking about what an ideal could be doesn't mean we can't try to like live up to it or learn how to like have these types of things, because I think you can, right? It's really hard to do, right? Like relationships are the hardest thing we do in life. Like work
Yes.
Easy.
Yeah.
Career, easy.
It's structured. There's There's literally instructions how to do these things.
But managing interpersonal relationships are so challenging.
Yeah.
So what were some of the family things you had on your list?
So one of the ones I think is really important. I think it builds off of the Meet the Robinsons dialogue that we were talking about. It was actually I know that. So I had Thor and Loki down there, but I actually just want to talk about Thor's family.
Okay.
I actually think as we sit and we talk about it, as I look at that relationship, I want to note actually Thor and Freya's relationship.
Yeah.
Because something that she does for him, spoilers, right? Okay. I have to figure out how I'm going to phrase this because everybody has different ways of framing it and everybody's going to associate it different.
Yeah.
Thor in Endgame. Thor was not doing okay, right? His
he had some stuff going on.
His physique had fallen. He really wasn't doing well. But there's a quote that Freya gives, and that's actually what I want to start with. Give me a second as I try to drum it out of my memory. We all fail at who we're supposed to be, and the measure of a man or a hero is being the best you.
Yeah.
And the way that you framed Meet the Robinsons, that was big, and that's that's something that hit me really deep, is because Thor is someone who is always struggling with finding worth, right? We see that in the very beginning. We see that with his movie, his arc, right?
Yeah.
His hammer can only be used if he's worthy, if he's deemed worthy. And so I think having those relationships where you're given that space, and so there's so much space she gives. She sees him. He's physically unwell. He's unkept. He's not wearing Asgardian, wear. He's wearing like a baggy hoodie.
Yeah. His
hair's not kept, and she hugs him. And
she saw him, right? She recognized him.
She felt him.
Yeah.
Right, and she snuck up on him. And then when she recognizes it's not her Thor, it didn't matter. She embraced him, called attention that you don't have to lie. I already know, right? That kind of acceptance and love is something, right, as we talk about ideal, I think that's what we need, is we need relationships, whether they're family or not. We need relationships where it's the Avatar line, I see you.
Yeah.
We need to be seen, and we need to be nudged in the right direction, right? Because she's not, like, coddling him.
No, she doesn't say, like, I see you, I accept you, oh, everything's fine.
Yeah.
And I think that to me is such an important point, because so many times I think we buy into this myth that if I see someone, if I accept someone, then I can never challenge them. I can never tell them their decisions are bad. Their choices they're making aren't in line with their values. They're more like, you can still hold firm and accept someone.
Yeah. Right? Throw back to episode 1, toxic positivity.
Yep.
Right? Sometimes it's okay for us to see someone, recognize, and point out the reality of things. So I think actually what she says is she goes, you have failed. And he goes, well, that's kind of harsh. And she goes, but she talks about how just like we all do, right? So she points out the reality of the situation, and she frames it in a way of why it's okay.
That it's non-shaming, right?
Yeah.
Like it's, this is hard. Life is hard. Like you've gone through a lot. Life is hard, and that's okay. But what are you going to do about it?
And so that's where it ties into what I actually put on the list, which is Thor and Loki. As much as Loki is the villain in the first part of this Avenger arc, he actually demonstrates that with Loki. And I think that he gets that because of the first movie. He recognizes that we lose our path, and he takes accountability. That was his whole restorative arc in the first movies. He needed to learn how to take accountability. So he's trying to do the same for Loki. And so he doesn't go out and obliterate Loki. He doesn't strike him down. He always captures him.
Yep.
And so I think that kind of shows that what Thor got, your waterfall metaphor, what Thor got in the first movie, he brings into the relationship with Loki.
Well, I think it just hit me. This is totally hitting close. I won't go into personal stuff about it too much, but this definitely hit something I'm going through with some of my siblings right now, which is setting appropriate boundaries, right? Yes. That the big shift you see in like the whole dynamic between Thor and Loki, especially in Ragnarok, is Thor pretty much says, you're not changing. Oh, my battery's dying. Dang it. Let's stop for a second.
Yeah. To be continued. We had a bit of a blip, but not to lose kind of where we were. You were talking about this like connection that you had with setting boundaries in siblings.
Yeah. Okay. I was like, let me get my sound back right. Okay, here we go. So in Ragnarok, which is what I was saying, was Thor pretty much just says, Loki, you're not changing. You're going to keep, dying, stabbing me in the back, like not showing up for me. And I know that about you. So I still accept you, but I'm not going to play that game anymore, right?
Yep.
So like he shifts he tricks Loki, if you will, right? And he goes off and does his own thing because he knows who Loki is. But that boundary immediately like shifts Loki, and Loki had a choice to like disappear, but he didn't. He showed up, and then from that point forward till the very beginning of Infinity War, right?
Yes.
That Loki had a very small window of he's changed, right?
Yeah.
Because his family put in boundaries. They said, this is who you are. We accept it, but we're not going to play with you if you're not going to play in our sandbox.
Yes. The cost of my relationship, right? And the acceptance of who you are. Like those coming together, right? It allows us to have that healthy relationship. And that's also what we were talking about with Remy and Linguini.
Yeah.
Where it's when we are kind of calling attention to this change that we want to do or this boundary that we're going to set, right? We have to set that boundary, we have to be firm, and we have to assert that this is where I'm going, this is who I'm going to be. Are you coming?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching this. We're on a little break right now. Go on and hit subscribe. Comment down below like what your favorite healthy relationship is for Disney. We'd love to hear all about it. If you leave a review on the podcast or you subscribe, you can take a screenshot and go to thedisneytherapist.com/review, and you can follow the instructions, and we have some free little stickers. I don't know if it's too small. I'll try to superimpose it on the screen. You can get one of those. We'll send those off to you for free. That's exclusive if you follow the steps on the disneytherapist.com/review. So with that, we're going to get back to the show. So that's a little bit about, I think, Thor and Loki. We had, who else do you have as like healthy family relationships? So this was our biggest category.
Yeah. So my favorite, my favorite movies growing up, and they're very nostalgic for me personally, Goofy and Max.
Okay.
And I really wanted to put that in there because I think it calls attention to the commentary we were having at the beginning. Does Disney do healthy relationships well? I would say that as a kid when I was watching it, it didn't look like a healthy relationship. But as I kind of rewatch it now, especially as a little bit of an adult. Yeah. It's healthy throughout the whole movie. There's just conflict.
You're talking about the Goofy movie.
Yes, the Goofy movie. Yes. Sorry. And primarily the first one. Second one I think is still great, but I think the first one does a really good job of it. Goofy's embarrassing, and Max doesn't want to be Goofy. And at the very beginning of the movie we see that. And so when they set off on this big adventure, right, they feel Goofy feels the disconnection, and you can see Max pushing away.
Yeah. And
so they go on this big trip, and we see how, as the parent, right, the parent gets to really decide where we're going because they're driving, they're paying for everything, all these things. And we see how at the very beginning, he tries to take that stance, but he sees it not working, and he makes space. He adjusts for Max, and they start doing some of what Max wants to do. And we see this beautiful montage of fun and exciting moments. But like a good teenager, Max takes advantage of it. Right? He's trying to go to this concert, so he's there's this huge crossroads, right? It's go left or right. And he disappoints Goofy. Mm-hmm. Right, he picks the wrong way, and Goofy has, at this point, he's been wised up to it, and as soon as he knows, the tone of the movie shifts. Yeah. But then they have the blowout. They have this big moment where they are honest, and they can express what they both want from each other, what they both want, personally, and they make it happen, and they do it together. And I think that's that beautiful moment where at the end we have the big concert. Number, yeah.
I was like, it's been a while since I've seen this movie, so I remember certain parts.
Yeah, but I want to point that out because it's a family relationship that doesn't start off great, right? It's not just all positive tones.
Mm-hmm.
It actually shows where the toxic, the infectious parts are, right? When we allow ourselves to be too disconnected, too selfish, we can see how it breaks the relationship.
It makes me think of, as it was what you just said, right? That a lot of the times because toxic, right? Infectious is probably a better thing, that disconnection comes from when we want two different things.
Yeah.
Right? And there's nothing inherently wrong with wanting two different things. Mm-hmm. But when we're unable to own what we want and talk about it and figure out like how do we navigate that, problems ensue. And I think especially when it comes to like parental child relationships is a lot of times kids want stuff and they can't get it. Like you don't get to go to the concert. You don't get to have these things. And it is the parents' responsibility to set those boundaries and not just say, okay, you want it, let's figure it out. Yeah. But it's saying like, those are all teachable moments to like lean into it. And it's a challenge.
Yeah. What comes to mind is I call it breadcrumbing, that there has to be enough of a trail.
Yeah.
So we can't over enforce, right? So this is where the infectious part is when we concretize how we're going to be. If as a parent, we're only going to do this and we're only going to make space for this, we're not flexible. We can't adjust.
Yeah.
We can't have an evolving child. And we wonder why some people grow up and they don't have that individuation, that ability to stand in and learn for themselves, because we kept them rooted at a developmental age.
Absolutely. So you also listed, or I listed, actually, we'll do this one. Mm-hmm. I listed Lilo and Stich.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because just like kind of, I think the Goofy movie with Goofy and Max, that is a great dynamic that shows family, but in a dynamic we normally don't see a lot of, which is father-son. In at least Disney movies, we don't see a ton of that. We definitely see that a lot in Marvel, but not so much in like cartoon Disney. Lilo and Stitch is great because I think it's that sibling, that sibling dynamic, and especially a sibling who's taking care of a younger sibling, right? Yeah. That the parents are gone, and that there's this struggle, right? Yeah. Lilo's sister, I forget her name in the movie. It's like it's been a while since I watched. Right. Why don't we watch all these? So she has to take care of it, and she's frustrated. She has to work. She has to do this, and Lilo's like a handful. It's just hard to work, and that struggle comes out between them. But then they also have moments throughout the movie where they're just family and they're just getting along and they're having fun. Yeah. And I like that because I think it shows a little bit more realistic of what to expect. Yeah. Because sometimes I think we put on this, the world needs to be perfect space. Mm-hmm. So then it's, if the family doesn't look perfect, if it doesn't act perfect, then what's wrong? And nothing has to be wrong. Like things are messy, and just accepting the messiness of life and still enjoying it, I think really healthy perspective. So that's why I wanted to list that, is because I think it shows like family can be messy and that's okay. It's still really healthy even when it's messy. It doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to have the white picket fence and the 2.1 kids and the dog and a cat, like all that. Yeah. Like it doesn't have to be that.
Stitch. You just need an alien dog.
Yeah, just an alien dog faces everything.
Not only does it show the messiness, I think it also talks about that boundary that we're actually really, really reinforcing with family here, where it's there's going to be conflict and there's going to be a cost of the relationship. She's always defiant, Lilo, right? Like she's always trying to push the boundaries. She is a little bit lost. She's very chaotic, and her sister has a hard time containing that. Yeah. But we can see when there's a shift. There's the sibling dynamic, the sibling frustration of, oh my gosh, you're so messy, you're so this, you're so that. But there's also a moment where she says, like, there's a seriousness. It's like, okay, like, yes, you're all these things, but there's a serious cost coming. And that's able to snap her into it. She knows the boundary, she knows the limit. And if it wasn't for Stitch, she wouldn't have pushed past them because she would have fallen in line. But she was also trying to chase this alien around. But we can see how, even if we're not getting along all the time, even if there's messiness, that we can still hear each other. Yeah. And we can show up when absolutely necessary.
Absolutely. I got up just a second ago. Yeah. if you heard it on the mic, because I forgot to turn the mic on the camera.
Gotcha.
Episode 4. We're still learning. Okay, so we're almost done with family stuff. One of the ones that I thought was great that you listed was, which I actually want to say for last. So there's 2 other ones before we get to the Frozen piece of it all. Because of course we have to talk about Frozen. You talk a lot, I think in these next 2, you're actually talking about parent-child relationships. So you listed Hercules and then Brave. So dive into why you think those are really great examples of healthy relationships.
The Hercules one. So one, I'm partial to Hercules. It's one of my favorite Disney movies, and I love in like the opening scenes, a little bit past opening. I think actually maybe the second opening, right? When he shows up to the market, and he is just sitting, waiting, and he's kind of told to kind of sit, not do anything. And he goes, and of course he does something. He goes to grab the frisbee, and he knocks the pillars over.
Yeah.
His dad doesn't bat an eye. Right?
He's like, yep, that's him.
He knows that's him. And is it difficult at times? Yes. But he doesn't scold. And, kind of referencing your comment earlier, there's no like how could you, you did something bad. It's, you're Hercules. This is you. And he tries to help encourage him that he's going to get it one day. He's going to figure this out.
Yeah.
And I thought that was just it's really warm for me, and then, you have the whole Superman story where he gets home, and, he gets all these different things, and he wants to go meet his real father. And what does he do? He helps. There's no insecurity. It's just, you are our son, and what you want to do, we're going to support. We're going to be behind. And I love that.
It's interesting. As you're talking and explaining that, I'm also thinking about how I just said, like, you listed Brave, and I didn't realize this, but this is definitely how this is like resonating with me right now, is both of those movies are talking about parent-child relationships that are about acceptance. Because Brave, we look at the overall theme of that movie with her and the relationship with her mom, is acceptance. Like, do we accept each other for who we are? And how do we learn to accept each other, flaws and all?
Yeah, so if Hercules was the light side of this conversation,
the dark side.
More the shadowy stuff, right? Where it's feelings, expectations, personal bias gets in the way.
Yeah.
So where in Hercules we see it's all just accepted from the beginning. In Brave it's not, right? There is no space for her to be her. And that gets challenged and confronted, right? Because now in our conversations about the cost of the relationship, we actually see that there's a cost to having a relationship with mom, right? Initially she says, I don't want it.
Yeah.
Right. So that's when mom's gone, it's like, we're free, everything's fine. But then the guilt sets in, and it's like, oh no, like I miss her. I might not like aspects of her, and maybe I should bring those up. Maybe we should talk about those, and those naturally resolve in the movie. But we see the cost of the relationship on both ends, and I think that really brings to light, the boundary setting, the how much we need to make space for somebody else. Yeah. It doesn't always have to be 100%, right? Because that's not what happens. We get to see that there is a way of having both. It might require adjustment on either end, but maybe it's much easier for us to shoulder the burden together than for us to have it our way.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's transition to the Frozen of it all.
Yes.
Frozen, family dynamics.
So big, right? Like I think that this is one that is everywhere.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be, I'm going to let you kick it off, because I think that this is what you...
Well, it's funny because we also listed like Big Hero 6. And there was something about this that I'm just now recognizing is a lot of the movies almost how and this is not how we listed it to talk about it. Like we just listed them and then I've been picking them out. But as we picked them out, they're all kind of having similar themes.
Yeah.
Which is like, I think in Frozen and then in Big Hero 6, we're seeing sibling relationships.
Yeah.
That aren't caretaking relationships, like in Lilo and Stitch, right? So that feels different. That this is about showing up for your sibling, how to form really healthy sibling relationships, right? Like just accepting and loving each other. And I think in Elsa and Anna's case, in the first, it's too interesting so much in the first movie versus the second movie.
Yes.
I think it's the same arc, but they are longing. Like Elsa's trying to figure out who she is. Anna just wants to be close.
Yes.
And the same thing is happening till the very end of the second movie where she has to let her go. was like, I can't help myself. But she just learns that like we can have a really strong, close relationship, but it might be different from what I expected.
Yes.
Right. And I do think that that's one of the things underneath all of this family stuff we've been talking about is our unspoken expectations, right? We have these expectations, and when it's unspoken, it could cause problems. So it's learning how to maybe shift our expectations and then state what we're needing and what we expect from people in our lives.
And interestingly enough, so an image that's coming to my mind is we've all had group projects. Now, could you imagine never talking to your group partner and having a complete project by the end?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I have. You know what happened? I did it all. That's what happened.
And how much resentment was fostered.
Oh, ton.
Exactly. And that's kind of like case in point here is I think that when we step into this and we don't communicate about maybe what we see or where we want it to go, we don't get the input of the others. And so we can be moving towards a situation that actually can't happen. And so it's important to vocalize and to kind of get the commentary from the people we're around, because then we can course correct.
Yep.
You know, and that just like our last conversation, you know, shouldering the burden together means that, you know, we can figure out how to get this done. We can help each other with some of the things that we want. And we also, right, it's not going to be 100% either our ways, but we're going to find a good enough solution. And I think that's something that I think, you know, at the point out kind of your conversation, we want to step out of the idealized version of this, and we want to talk about the good enough solutions, because in each of these situations, you know, we actually are satisfied with the good enough option, and so I think that that's kind of where you're at.
Yeah,
you're talking about how being able to communicate means that we are able to unfreeze ourselves.
Yes.
And we are able to move to the conclusion of the movie.
Well, and that's where I think in Frozen 1, right, the big conflict comes between Anna and Elsa, where Elsa like hits her with the ice again, right? Like, oh, it's building. It's they're not listening to each other. Right? There's
collateral damage.
They're not just saying, "Hey, I'm here. Can that be good enough?" Like, there's all these expectations. There's all these things that they're not really talking about. Yeah. And then with time, it starts to shift a little bit. And then I think the catalyst in the second movie is Elsa's feeling called, but instead of talking about that sooner, she waits till something happens, and then now it's like we're on this rush for adventure versus working through something that's coming up for us in the moment, which is really hard because it again comes to one of the big themes that we keep coming up, which is vulnerability. Can we be vulnerable with what we're thinking, what we're feeling with our family members?
I'm like smiling so big because it's so obvious, and it's so like not communicating results in either of them getting frozen and until they find a way to vocalize what they need does the movie like unfreeze. And so in the first movie, I think something that's really interesting is Anna is making a lot of space for Elsa and is trying to encourage her to come out of her shell. But it can't be one-sided, right? Elsa doesn't know how to come out of her shell, which is why that song is so important to Let It Go, is because what she's really saying is, I let go of the expectations, I'm just going to be me, I'm going to do things my way. And we see her come into her own. And I think that helps her have the confidence to say, I'm just going to be me, and take it or leave it, right? So she already knows that she can be a frozen princess in a beautiful palace that she can make on her own. But it's not as warm, it's not as loving as she wants, so she steps down. And she comes back in, and she sees all the conflict, but she is ready to assert herself.
Which tells me we need to do an episode on Frozen, because as soon as you said that, like I went into like the essence of like we know when people like come out of the closet, there's steps people come out of the closet, and one of the steps, especially after they come out, is that's their whole identity, that they lose all the other parts of themselves. Right, until they can learn to like recognize there's multiple different parts. Right, and in a way, that's what Elsa did. She said, "This is who I am. I'm a frosty queen, whatever." Right, so I'll stick with like maybe queer language. Right, I'm a frosty queen. I'm going to live in my ice palace, and that's all she was. She wasn't willing to look at other parts of herself. And then at the end, when Anna sacrifices herself in the first movie, that's when she can start to like, oh, like I'm also a sister, right? Which then melts it. So it is this place of just recognizing there's all these different parts of ourselves that we have to show up and show to our family. And I would say that it's not just our blood family, but it's also like our romantic partners, this works the same way.
Any of our chosen family,
Yeah.
any of our chosen relationships, friends included. And that's part of the individuation process, calling back to another kind of buzzword that I threw out earlier, where sometimes when we are trying to grow, we have to overinflate and overpower something because it's a voice that we have suppressed for too long. But part of the journey is learning how to call that back in and have it as a counsel, so before we kind of transition to the next thing, with Inside Out, when we saw it developmentally, before, when they were teens and kids, the emotion was running rampant.
Yeah.
But as they were adults, they sat at a console and they were a counsel.
Thank you guys for listening to this. We really appreciate it. Go on and hit subscribe, or make sure you subscribe. Words are hard. I'm not even editing. This is going to be in the thing. Make sure you subscribe to YouTube, your favorite podcast player. Our goal is just to kind of grow this and see where it goes. We're having a lot of fun doing this. This is actually what we'd be doing like most days, talking the same exact way. So we love for you to join us on this journey. So go on and hit subscribe, leave a review because it will help us grow. Share it on your social media page, tag us in your stuff. All the social media stuff's in our bios on any page, so you can check all that stuff out. So with that, we're gonna get back to the show. Okay.
Yeah.
So this is at the tail end of the episode, and we're looking at the clock going, oh, this episode has now become 2.
Yes.
So if you're hearing this now, this is why it's split into 2. It's because originally this was supposed to be just 1 episode. Yeah. And we kept going, and we realized we put too much information that we wanted to talk about, and we said we wanted to hit it, so we're hitting them all.
Yeah.
So that's how it became 2 episodes, is we were talking a lot. So hopefully it made sense. Hopefully it's not too overwhelming.
Yeah. We weren't going to trim content to fit a time frame. This is stuff we love talking about, so we want to make sure we get through it all.
Is this why you run over in session sometimes?
Yes. I run over because sessions are 50 minutes, but usually by the hour I'm like, okay, it's done.
Okay.
So I do have some boundaries.
Okay.
I'm just a little messy with them.
I got it. Okay, so we're moving in. So we moved out of family, and we're moving in to the last section we wanted to talk about healthy relationships, and we wanted to talk about romance.
Yes.
So when you think of romance, what's healthy romance for you from a Disney movie? Because sometimes, I think it's really challenging because there's a lot of unhealthy romances in Disney, right?
Yes.
There's a lot of, I'm going to rescue, we fall in love, happily ever after.
Yeah, so I think I centered mine more on the optimistic sides.
Okay.
And so one that, and I don't know how people are going to view, and I would really like to hear what people think on it.
So comment down below on what you think, Alan, whatever Alan says here.
Yeah, because I have this obsession with WALL-E.
Okay.
Especially
I do too.
When it comes to romantic movies, especially because the romantic characters are actually in a silent film.
Yeah.
And so I remember hearing that one day, and I looked back at it, and outside of a couple phrases here and there, it really is silent. So this relationship is happening just based off of body language, context clues, and just how they're showing up for each other. And so I thought it was really interesting because we have these 2 characters coming from these drastically different worlds, right? WALL-E is messy, he's dirty, he is
star-crossed lovers, if you will.
Yes. And she is this, technically she'd be the princess of the movie, right? And she is the Disney princesses we see has to adhere to a certain structure of her culture.
Yes.
So she gets called away, and before we get there, right? She shows up, she is blasting everything, she's trying to figure things out, and they meet, and he rescues her, right? And that is the unfortunate part. But once in the little truck, she starts to see the wonder that WALL-E has, and she's attracted to that. And they start to connect, they start to share, right? She gets to share all of this future tech, she gets to participate, she gets to show her interest. That's what she brings into this relationship, and he brings in all of his extensive knowledge.
Yeah.
Right? He's equipped with all this information. He's just looking for someone to share it with. And since she is so new and doesn't have this information, they're perfect.
Yeah.
But a wrench gets thrown into it, and he's in love. He's in love with what she represents. And so he commits all of this effort, right? And we get all these funny clips, right? You know, the carts where he's getting kind of, you know, he's chasing her around. And then, right after he finally gets this moment, she shuts down. And then we get the other montage of clips where he is just trying. He's trying to break through the exterior. And she has no clue. I think that's part of what I love, just because, you know, fast forward through the movie when he's trying to chase her, still chasing her. When she finally gets to see through the memories, right, of what he has done, she gets attached to it. She sees the effort, she sees the commitment, and she's willing to pay back that investment. And so I think that this has a lot of the themes of things I've talked about today, where it's the, you know, the connection, how we're different, how we can appreciate what each other has to offer, and we can respect the commitment. And of course, because my brain can't now, now I'm all the way back at the first episode now.
Yeah.
Your comment about how we sometimes glorify the pursuer. So now this is kind of taking a different turn, but I'm also seeing, I want to highlight that piece too, where it's, you know, the pursuit is being glorified here.
Yeah.
And I think that that's, as an anxiously attached person, right, I think that's why I like this, is because his effort is rewarded. And not to say that I think that it always needs to be that way, but I think just in this, right, when they have these star-crossed lover kind of offering and filling each other's spaces, that the effort and the commitment put into the movie was rewarded.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think it could be challenging because sometimes the person, like usually too, a male protagonist who's pursuing, sometimes doesn't take the hint, right? Yeah. And it comes across as romantic, but it isn't necessarily romantic. It doesn't work in the real world.
Yeah.
Wally, I feel, is a little bit different because Wally is taking the hint. Like,
yeah, she has these like moments.
She shows up, then she shuts down, right? And it's nothing to do with her, so he's just concerned and he follows her. And then he's in this whole new world, right? So it's that fish out of water story.
Yeah.
And I think the ultimate thing is like when she puts him in the pod to like eject him, and he's like still like thinking she's into this, and she's not, but she hasn't let him down softly yet.
Yeah.
But then him just being himself, like he saves the plant, he does all these things. Like he's just himself and he's pursuing her, but he's not pursuing her to like win her. He's just pursuing her because he likes her.
Yeah.
And she hasn't set those boundaries, and then she realizes she likes him.
Yeah, I think what happened as you're that scene, you know, I think that what she sees is that he took interest in something that was hers.
Yeah.
And that commitment, that like, oh my gosh, like you protected that for me. You saw that I like this and you remembered. And I think that that's kind of what gets her to then start to fall for him.
Yeah. And then when she ends up seeing all the memories, like I think that happens a little bit before. I forget exactly where it falls. That's when she starts to realize, oh, he's been showing up for me. He's been showing up for me. He's been showing up for me, which I do think speaks to a really a dynamic that happens in relationships, right? That some people are anxious. You identify saying, I'm anxious too in my relationship. We've talked about this. But then we're with people who are a little bit more withdrawers, right? Yeah. And that sometimes the withdrawer, it's not that they don't care. Mm-hmm. They just don't always recognize the amount of energy they need to maybe put in. And the anxious person really has to like calm down, right? Yeah. You have to learn to pull it back. You can't always be pursuing someone else. You have to have really firm boundaries and expectations and say those things, which is interesting in Wally because there's no talking. So it's hard. They can't do that. So they're navigating in a very non-verbal type of way. Mm-hmm. What other healthy relationships did you see through Disney movies?
So it's the same camp, but Tarzan and Jane.
Okay.
You know, I think it is the Wally and Eve situation, just with two beings who can communicate a little better.
Yeah.
As I'm thinking, I think that there's not a moment where we're shown that he actually can't speak. He just can, which is a little weird, but once again, two individuals who are from different worlds who have a fascination about the other person. And that fascination and that time together, it allows us to get to know each other And through that, if wanted, we can find love. It is just the stepping into a place and having the curiosity, the mystery, and wondering, what if? Where does this go?
I think mystery, that stands out to me because that is an important part of like romance and love, right? There has to be this space where we're interested in the other person. There's the mystery. There's a curiosity we start to form about wanting to know this other person in a much deeper way. Yeah. And it's interesting because, so you listed Tarzan and Wally, and the one you haven't talked about yet is Aladdin, right?
Yeah.
All of them are fish out of water stories.
Okay, explain.
All of them take like maybe the protagonist and put them in a new situation that's not their normal situation, right?
Yeah.
Right, so that's definitely in Tarzan, that's in Wally. But then Aladdin becomes a prince, right? He gets the genie, he becomes a prince, he does all these things. He's out of his norm, right? So it's, I don't know, I mean, maybe this is something we can dive into in a future episode about like what it is, what it says about you that you found the romantic movies that are all like...
I just found it.
Okay.
You're going to hear a lot. Everybody's going to hear a lot that I try my best to still be a kid.
Yeah.
And I think that being out of water, I think that each of these relationships shows someone having to maybe sacrifice a little bit and to really put themselves out there and how scary that can be.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's kind of what that speaks to, is that these are all individuals who want to pursue something. And it's actually interesting because not just fish out of waters, all the male protagonists are the ones who are coming from what we would consider a less ideal situation.
Yeah.
And then, all three of these princesses there's a lot of class. There's a lot of, the way that I'm projecting onto it right now is there's a lot of responsibility. There's a lot to be cared for. There's a lot of cleanness that has to be brought into that space.
This makes me think of maybe we should do an episode like this where we write down like certain stories. We have a theme and you write down a certain stories and you see how it resonates with you.
Yeah.
Because you can see already, like without even thinking, like this was not part of the plan.
No, not at all.
Right? Is that you had those three, but it's like this fish out of water. Okay, so now there's something about that energy that resonates, and then you're starting to even see how that might resonate with you. So you're learning something about yourself, which is why, like again, why we like to do this podcast, because you can learn so much about yourself through the stuff that you enjoy. And like as you were saying that, I was looking at my two for healthy relationships. Is I chose Frozen, so Frozen 2 with Kristoff and Anna, and then I chose Tangled.
Yeah.
Right, with Flynn and Rapunzel.
Yeah.
Now, this is my stuff, right? Both of those, the male, right?
Yeah.
They're not necessarily a protagonist, right? They're this more of the supporting character, are showing up for their partner, right? They're not necessarily demanding stuff from their partner, but they show up, right? So Flynn at the end of Tangled makes a sacrifice for his partner because he's more concerned about her.
Yeah.
Kristoff has this great love ballad in Frozen 2 where he's just talking about how much he loves her and how he just wants to be there for and support her. And even at the end of the movie, when she's saying, hey, let's do this, he just comes in, he says, what do we need to do? And he does it, right? Yeah. So I think that speaks volumes to kind of my personality and relationship of I connected with like romance tropes around like showing up for your partner. Because that's kind of what I do, is like I like to show up and that this might not be as in depth, right? But this is definitely telling us something about ourselves, which is there are certain things that show up in relationships that we will resonate with. And at least for the two examples I picked, those are all about like what's healthy showing up for, right? Which is a little bit of sacrifice, a little bit of I'm doing this because I care about you, not because I get anything, right? Yeah. I'm doing this because you need help and you're a capable person, so I'm gonna let you do what you need to do and I'm gonna help you with it, right? That giving each other autonomy, but then also supporting each other, right? Which to me is healthy dependence.
It's interesting. So I want to comment on something.
Yeah, you can
I think that your comment on this maybe isn't depthy, is your way of saying don't go there. But I think that there's so much depth. And I think if we really want to look at it, I think that you and I are wanting to associate with those characters, but maybe noticing what we want.
Yeah.
What is inside of us that maybe needs to be fostered.
Yeah, what we might not let out enough.
Yeah. So I know, because as you were sharing yours, because we're friends and I know you, that I actually see you as like Rapunzel or Anna in this situation, because you have the energy right? And I'm always very vocal with you about that, how you have so much energy and you're always moving.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that's important is when you have that you need someone who isn't going to question and is going to show up and go, you've got the energy, I'm here to help.
Yeah, right up behind. What do you need? What do you need done?
Yeah.
What do you need?
Someone to support that, And so this really calls attention to our very first topic, mentorship, where we thought it was so important to do this podcast was because our therapeutic approaches really live in stories and fairy tales. Yeah. And you and I are talking about how we can have mentorship through a story that we're interacting with. And so I think that's really important to kind of highlight why we're doing this and why we think it's so important, and where I would love, right, for you guys to comment and share, not just the mentorship that maybe you get in the movies that you watch and maybe what you're learning through being able to dissect these, but also letting us know kind of what topics and themes that you hear from us that are helpful, so we can make sure that we're speaking to something that you guys want to hear.
What romantic Disney movies, what stories stand out for you, and starting to dissect those pieces and seeing what comes on. Because unbeknownst to us, stuff gets triggered in us, right? So
yes.
even all the lists that we made throughout all of these healthy relationships, it's because something's resonating with us and we're starting to dissect how it resonates with us. And that's where having the language of these myths, these stories can help us learn to live maybe a healthier or more connected life.
Yeah.
So in the sense of us talking about romance, right? We're not talking about like what necessarily like these are the steps to have a healthy relationship, because those might be very different, but there's something about all the examples we use, showing up for your partner, pursuing, just being present, accepting, like all these things. And I would say with all these things, one of the biggest themes, I think even from these now 2 episodes, is acceptance, right? Yeah. Acceptance, vulnerability, checking your expectations at the door, right? Yeah. All these things help develop healthier relationships. Yeah. And if we're constantly checking in with those things, is like, what are my expectations? Am I accepting the people that are in my life? And am I being vulnerable with what I need and want? Then we're probably on the path to have healthy relationships.
Yeah. And I think thematically what I'm starting to see as we dissect these is that's not just relationships, that's authenticity, and that's going to help us be more connected just in general.
Absolutely. Any other thoughts on healthy relationships over these last 2 episodies?
I'm trying to think, because I think that there's a couple things that I wanted to point out, and I'm trying to find the words. So with the relationships, it's thematically, you've hit the nail on the head. Like, that's kind of what we see. And something that is different in each of these is how the characters respond to maybe the conscious awareness of what they need, or just this weird feeling that they have, and how they dissect and how they understand that feeling. So one part, and why I put Jasmine and Aladdin down, because it's really important that the relationship began as a lie, kind of. It started off super authentic, and then we did all of this scheming and manipulation to try to win the other person over, but what really worked at the end was being each other and then vocalizing that more publicly. And so I loved that, because in the other 2, it's just, oh, this is you, I'm making space for you. Yeah. Boom, we're just getting to know each other. I felt that Jasmine and Aladdin had this dance, and I think it was really important to see that dance come to fruition, and how Genie's character, I actually think, is kind of his inner therapist, right? He's not judgmental. He's saying, I think that this is how we should do it.
Be yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. He does that, but he's not going to judge. So he's not the inner conscience, because the inner conscience, Jiminy Cricket's kind of judgmental. Yeah. So I think that actually Genie's the mystic of the story, and he just highlights aspects and themes. And how beautiful is it that at the end of the movie, when he is authentic, he is able to free the inner therapist.
And I think we will probably spend a whole episode, probably breaking down a little bit more of healthy romantic relationships or unhealthy romantic relationships and all these pieces. So we didn't necessarily spend as much time in this episode about them, or these episodes about them. Yeah. So with that, is there anything else?
No, I think just we kind of end on a strong note with what you were saying, that this was hopefully a teaser into where we can take each of these films, and some of the aspects, and it's just about finding the interest, hearing about where you want us to go further, so we can kind of share that content with you.
We're just throwing a lot of stuff out to see what resonates and see where it goes. So
yeah.
So with that, if you're listening to this, make sure you listen to the first episode, if this is the first one you did, first one you listened to. So this is part 2. So make sure you listen to part 1. And with that, make sure you subscribe, follow, all that jazz. And we will be back next week with a new episode.